Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles on a very busy day in Washington where we are covering multiple breaking stories and multiple high-stakes meetings happening at the White House. Top congressional leaders and President Trump are set to be meeting right now with a government shutdown now less than 36 hours away. This meeting is a small sign of progress toward avoiding a shutdown after President Trump canceled a meeting with top Democrats late last week. But as the meeting was set to begin, there was no sign from either side that they were ready to strike a deal. This afternoon, the president put the onus on Democrats to make a deal, while Democrats are skeptical that Republicans are actually interested in serious negotiation.
Chuck Schumer came back with a long laundry list of partisan demands that don't fit into this process, and he's going to try to shut the government down. The president wants to talk with him about that and say, please, don't do that. Chuck Schumer is doing this for one reason. He is trying to get cover from the far left base of his party because they've been hammering him for not fighting Trump. So he's going to try to show that he's fighting Trump, but he has absolutely no logical basis for doing so here.
So we've been resolute that we need a meeting, that we need a real negotiation, that you don't do this by one party putting together a completely partisan bill and saying take it or leave it. So they felt the heat. The president at first said no. Remember, he first said yes for a meeting, then he said no for a meeting. He went on a rant against Democrats. But I think they felt the heat, and they now want to sit down.
House Republicans passed a short-term funding extension, but it needs Democratic votes to pass the Senate. And Democrats are standing firm on their demands, which includes the extension of some Affordable Care Act subsidies and a reversal of cuts to Medicaid. House Minority Leader Jeffries says that verbal assurances on extending those subsidies are just not enough.
No one can trust their word on health care. Are you kidding me? These people have been trying to repeal and displace people off the Affordable Care Act since 2010. That's 15 years. And on behalf of the American people, we're supposed to simply take their word that they're willing to negotiate. The American people know that would be an unreasonable thing for us to do.
Meanwhile, the White House is trying to force Democrats to back down from their demands by threatening mass firings during a potential shutdown. President Trump calling it a, quote, possibility in an exclusive interview with NBC News, adding if there is a shutdown, we're going to cut a lot of the people that we're able to cut on a permanent basis, and we'll be doing that. I'd rather not do that. But Democrats like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who said the threat of federal layoffs influenced his decision to vote to keep the government open in March, are dismissing the threat of mass layoffs. Here's what he said on Meet the Press.
They're doing it anyway. There's no shutdown. They're laying off all these people. The budget they proposed says another 300,000 federal workers should be laid off. They laid off 80,000 in the Veterans Administration. They're trying to intimidate the American people and us.
Another complicating factor here, even if there were a deal to be reached, the House is out of session until after the shutdown deadline has passed. Joining me now from the White House is NBC News' Yamiche Alcindor, and Julie Sirkin has the latest from Capitol Hill. And we're going to bounce back and forth between both you guys because this news is fast breaking. In fact, these congressional leaders could emerge at any moment. So, Julie, first to you, does it seem as though the congressional leaders are going into this meeting with the White House wanting to make a deal, or is a shutdown inevitable at this point?
Ryan, I don't think they would be going to the White House if they didn't want to make some sort of deal, because as you and I have covered for years, shutdowns are not viable or not a positive thing for any political party, though the last time the government had a full shutdown, it certainly hurt the president, ended up hurting Democrats in the midterms afterwards. So this is not a winner that either side can claim politically, and that is why you're seeing the four leaders head to the White House, presumably meeting right now with President Trump, trying to find some kind of off-ramp to this. But the thing that makes this situation so different than even the potential shutdown we were watching in the spring is that this time around, Leader Chuck Schumer, who was resistant to a shutdown last time, seems open to at least getting down to the wire. He demanded, as you know, a slew of health subsidies, including extending or making permanent the Affordable Care Act subsidies that Republicans essentially gutted as part of that so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. Democrats are trying to stay firm on that. In many cases, it's because their base wants them to. I talked to Senator Chris Murphy, for example, on Friday, who told me he does not think prominent Democrats are doing enough to fight back. And remember, the power of the purse lies within the minority. Democrats really have this opportunity, government funding, in which they can push back after the Jimmy Kimmel stuff that we saw when he was pulled off the air, after all kinds of things that we've seen happen where Democrats are saying, look, why would we continue to fund a government the president does not seem to respect? And so for all of those reasons, Democrats are dug in. But again, a little more than 24 hours to go until potential government shutdown. And so certainly both sides want to make a deal.
Ivey, let's go to you now. And you obviously talked to President Trump over the weekend. From your sense, what changed between the canceled meeting and now? Why is it that the White House is willing to meet when Democrats apparently haven't changed their stance?
It's a key question, Ryan, and I actually have to say I'm not quite clear on what changed in President Trump's mind. He told me that he was going to have this meeting with Democrats and that he was going to essentially hold firm to what he doesn't want to do. One of those things he said was not funding health care for immigrants in the United States illegally. He also said that he didn't want to sort of give that signal to immigrants across the world in case people were coming here. But we also know that Democrats are saying that that's not what they're trying to do, that they're actually just trying to restore cuts to Medicaid. So there's a discrepancy there. That being said, the president didn't really sound that optimistic, I have to tell you. When I asked him, is there going to be a shutdown? He said that's a possibility. Then I asked him, well, aren't you worried about maybe people like the National Guard not being paid? And he told me they're great American patriots. He also, without me asking, said that he is willing to and very real about that threat to fire millions of Americans, going far beyond, of course, the traditional furloughing, and saying that while he didn't want to do that, he made it that he would do that. So it's really interesting to see that he is taking this meeting, given the fact that he abruptly canceled last week's meeting. So it says that maybe he wants to negotiate, but I also got the sense that he just wants to lay down the law for Democrats. And I didn't really see any room for compromise, at least in my conversation with him, Ryan.
And Yamiche, you got him as well to, I don't want to use the term double down, but you very specifically asked him about this threat to fire federal workers as a result of the shutdown. It's one thing for that to be in kind of, a boring government memo, but for the president to actually say that permanently a lot of federal workers could lose their job, that's pretty significant.
It is very significant, Ryan, and the president was very clear that he would take that step if a shutdown happened, though he said, I'd rather not do that. What we hear from our sources talking to NBC News about this is that there are a lot of programs and policies and sort of things in the government that the president is looking at and saying, well, they're not serving my priorities or my missions for the government. So if there is a shutdown, I'm going to use the shutdown to really go after those things. What specifically those things are, we're not sure. We know that they've, of course, taken a lot of cuts at the Department of Education, a lot of cuts at other sort of nonprofits doing work overseas. But it would be really interesting to see if this ends up happening. Maybe heartbreaking is maybe a better word, to see what ends up happening, because millions of Americans could lose their jobs permanently, even if this becomes a legal battle later on and people maybe try to fight back to get their jobs, because it's not clear the president has the new authority to do that. But it is something that I think has a lot of people in Washington and beyond very worried, Ryan.
Julie, this exact scenario that Yamiche is outlining is the very scenario that Chuck Schumer used as his argument not to shut down the government in the spring. Why is it the Democrats are not taking this threat as seriously now as they did back then?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that, and the most glaring one to me, Ryan, is what Chuck Schumer heard after the fact from his Democratic base all over social media, calls to his office. I mean, real public protests from the very people the Democrats need to keep happy in order to win them back, make them show up to the polls in the next election, try and win back the Senate and the House, and in 2028 have a shot at winning the White House. Those are the people that Chuck Schumer is trying to appeal to right now. What makes this so much Schumer's game, even more than Jeffries, I think, is the fact that the House already passed that 7-week clean extension of status quo government funding levels. In the Senate, it's still very much a live ball. So you're seeing this aggressive messaging from Jeffries as well. But of course, here, Schumer is the one that we're watching in trying to message to his base saying, look, we're fighting. We're trying to restore these health care cuts that Republicans say are going to be so damaging, especially especially when those ACA subsidies expire at the end of this year. We're fighting back against an administration that they say is pulling hosts off the air or is trying to stifle free speech. They're really fighting back against this. I think it really is a situation of who blinks first. The fact that this meeting is happening is a very positive side. I think we can both agree the shutdown-o-meter went down a little bit to what you were predicting beforehand. But all in all, the shutdown is set to begin in a little bit over 24 hours from now. They don't have a lot of time to figure this out. Maybe they'll accept some kind of handshake deal from Republicans who, by the way, it's not politically viable for them either in terms of those ACA subsidies going away that could impact particularly people in rural areas. And so I think this is a fight that Republicans are perhaps willing to play ball in later this year. But again, their only proposal on the table from Republicans at this point is that 7-week extension of status quo government funding levels, taking them into Thanksgiving, and then maybe Democrats will have that fight then.
So my shutdown-o-meter was at 80%. The meeting brought it down to 75%. But if the meeting goes bad, it could skyrocket past 80%. So we'll have to see what happens. We're keeping a very close eye on the White House. Julie Sirkin, thank you so much for that. We'll check back with you if we hear from the president and congressional leaders as this meeting is expected to get underway. Yamiche, though, you're sticking around because, as we've noted, President Trump's meeting with congressional leaders is not the only high-stakes meeting happening today at the White House. This afternoon, President Trump welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House as the Trump administration continues to try to negotiate an end to the war between Israel and Hamas. Speaking alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump announced the details of his latest 20-point plan for a ceasefire, hostage release, and the future governance of Gaza, saying he believes the deal is very, very close.
If accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours. So the hostages are coming back, working with the new transitional authority in Gaza. All parties will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. If Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, they're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do.
While Prime Minister Netanyahu didn't explicitly say that he agreed to the proposal, he did signal his support and had this warning for Hamas.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims. It will bring back to Israel all our hostages, dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, end its political rule, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done.
Yamiche is still with us outside the White House. Also joining me now is Ambassador Dennis Ross, a former Middle East envoy and NBC News foreign affairs analyst. So, Yamiche, what are your biggest takeaways from this press conference? Does the gap between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu look to be closing?
I think the gap between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump has closed because Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he's on board with the plan. But the big issue here is whether or not Hamas is going to agree to this plan. You walk through some of it. It's calling for an immediate ceasefire, but it's also calling for Gaza to be demilitarized in some ways, and for Hamas to put down all its arms and give back these hostages and then have no governing power in Gaza. They're saying that they could stay in Gaza and have amnesty or go to another country and have safe passage, but there isn't a sort of two-state solution here, which is something that I think some people in Hamas have signaled that they want. So it's a big question here. The president also, I think, said something that's really striking. He said, if Hamas does not accept this deal, Israel has the backing of the United States to do what you have to do. And I wanted to make sure I got that quote right so I was reading it, because it really was a stark warning to Hamas that if they don't accept this deal and sort of get on board, that then things could get even worse. And of course, we've seen so many people killed in Gaza, women, children, civilians. So it's hard to see how things could get even worse. But that's sort of what the plan is here if President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu don't get Hamas to back this deal.
And President Trump also hosted a trilateral phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Prime Minister of Qatar. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it was really interesting because, of course, we saw that strike from Israel into Qatar, killing some Hamas leaders as well as at least one Qatari official. And the White House put out this rare readout of the call where they said that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, apologized essentially and said he deeply regretted that the strike violated the sovereignty of Qatar and that it would not happen again and that he was committed to peace. So in there you see this sort of conciliatory tone coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu that we don't usually see, but you also see this sort of trilateral call happening, showing that things are moving ahead and that progress is being made. Again, the big question now is whether or not Hamas is going to get on board with this. It's interesting to see Arab leaders getting on board with this deal, and the president saying everybody essentially is on board except for Hamas. So definitely watching to see what their reaction is going to be to this.
Okay, Yamiche, thank you for that. Let's bring in you now, Ambassador Ross. Of course, you know better than anyone that a deal is not a deal until everyone has signed off on it. But what do you make of the president's 20-point peace plan that includes an immediate end to the war, the withdrawal of Israeli troops, and the release of all the hostages within 72 hours? Is this a realistic proposal? And how likely is it that both Israel and Hamas will agree to the proposal and then actually follow through on it?
Well, I think the last part of your question is the most important part. I can actually see two yes buts. Neither side rejects, both sides says we accept it. Look, Prime Minister Netanyahu was very artful in terms of what he said. We agree to end the war and have all of our hostages released. He went through the parts of the plan that are good from his standpoint. The plan itself also talks about the PA, the Palestinian Authority, not ruling Gaza, but having a role in it. Prime Minister Netanyahu said this is a plan that doesn't have either Hamas or PA. Well, that's actually not the case in the plan. This is a plan that also talks about a reformed Palestinian Authority creating the conditions for what could then be a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Netanyahu is against a Palestinian state. By the way, Hamas is against two states. We should be clear on that. They have rejected the idea of two states all along. So I think what we have here is the administration has put together what is a plan that is supported by the Europeans and by the Arabs. Prime Minister Netanyahu came here in a position where he couldn't say no to it. The fact that he couldn't say no to President Trump is revealed by his seeming embrace of the plan, but also the phone call to the Prime Minister of Qatar. If you go back and look at what the Prime Minister was saying after the Israelis carried out the strike, it was very strong language saying, justifying the strike, and now we have an apology. So that suggests that the Prime Minister realizes that saying no to President Trump at this point comes at a cost.
We also heard Netanyahu, though, vowing to what he said, finish the job in his address to the United Nations General Assembly last week. What does that say about his willingness to push through a peace deal?
Well, I think with his current government, pushing through a peace deal isn't very realistic. As long as he has ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in the government, they won't accept any part of that. So he may be in a position where pretty much he has to accept the fact that he may lose this government, may have to go to elections, and may go, if he does adopt that position, he'd be going to election having embraced the Trump plan. But as I said, I still believe we're going to find there are all sorts of details that have to be negotiated, even in the best of circumstances. This is a plan that calls for the phased withdrawal of the Israeli military, the phased deployment of a stabilization force, an international stabilization force in its place. There are a whole set of details that will have to be worked out. What are the circumstances under which the Israelis will be withdrawing? From where will they be withdrawing? What will these forces, primarily air forces coming in from the outside, what do they need to see from the Israelis before they will come in? Once they're in, what is acceptable Israeli behavior from their standpoint? The sequence built into this all still has to be negotiated. The whole notion of when this administration from the outside begins, that has to be negotiated. What is the mechanism to prevent Hamas from being able to continue smuggling? Hamas built up a huge tunnel network, a huge military infrastructure through this smuggling through the tunnels. So what's the mechanism to prevent that? So there's a whole series of practical questions that will have to be worked out, legitimately have to be negotiated. Even if your intent is good that you want to implement this, it will take time and it will take very serious negotiations with teams of experts to get it done. That said, at least it creates the promise of bringing an end to the war.
So we've also seen some Western nations try and ramp up pressure on Israel by asking them to formally recognize a Palestinian state. Some of these Western nations have done that on their own. The Trump administration has stopped short of doing that. What leverage does the president have over Netanyahu at this point, and how far might he go to get his way, President Trump?
It's hard to know how far he will go. He has enormous leverage. He did what no president has done before, is he carried out a military strike against the hardest targets in Iran as part of the nuclear infrastructure that was targeted, meaning specifically the Fordo nuclear complex that was built into a mountain. That fact gives him a lot of leverage on the prime minister. The fact that he has stood up and not recognized the Palestinian state, even as others had, the fact that the U.S. is there to protect Israel in the Security Council against what is clearly moves by our traditional allies against Israel, all these give him enormous leverage. So that's the first part of the question. The second part is, when will he be prepared to exercise it? That's an interesting question. We saw him at the end of the 12-day war when it looked like the Israelis were going to carry out a strike in response to an Iranian strike that came after the ceasefire time was supposed to be established. The president called Netanyahu and turned those planes around. They were within a minute. 50 planes were in a minute of Iranian airspace, and they turned around. So if he insists on something with the prime minister, it's pretty clear the prime minister is not inclined to say no.
Okay. Ambassador Dennis Ross, we're going to have to leave it there. It looks like we lost your picture anyway, but we got everything you said in, so that's good. Still ahead. We believe that meeting between the president and congressional leaders has begun. We're going to keep a close eye on it and bring you any updates as we get them. And I'm going to talk to a House Democrat who represents a lot of federal workers who could be laid off. Plus, Michigan in mourning. The search for answers after at least 4 people were killed and 8 injured when an attacker drove a car into a church and opened fire. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Officials in Michigan now say everyone has been accounted for following yesterday's deadly attack on a church in the Flint suburb of Grand Blanc. Authorities say 4 people were killed and 8 others were injured when a man opened fire after crashing his vehicle through the front doors of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They say he also set the church on fire before being killed in a shootout with police. The FBI is calling the attack an act of targeted violence. Investigators have identified the suspect as Thomas Jacob Sanford, a 40-year-old former Marine. They're focused now determining a motive.
In the past 24 hours, our investigative squads and specialty teams have been out all night, exhausting leads, some of which have been coming in from the public via tips. Our special agents, victim specialists, child advocate forensic interviewers, and local partners have interviewed over 100 victims and witnesses to date and are continuing to interview individuals as we speak.
Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer today calling on people to lower the temperature of their rhetoric and saying that President Trump offered his condolences when they spoke this morning. She also addressed the issue of gun violence.
As a state, we know the pain of this too well. We've seen gun violence in our schools, stores, parades, festivals, and our houses of worship. These are places that we go to feel connected, to feel safe, to be together. But today, this place has been shattered by bullets and broken glass. And this might be a familiar pain, but it hurts all the same. Every time. We cannot keep living our lives like this.
Joining me now for the latest on this investigation, NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter. So, Tom, update us. What is the latest on this investigation?
Right. Well, we did get some information today. You already kind of put out there the best news, Ryan, that we could hope for, which is that nobody else was found inside up until and through last evening. The fear was that because there were hundreds of people inside that church, according to authorities, and because this fire was accelerated by the use of gasoline, they found those improvised explosive devices inside, something the ATF is investigating, that there would be people inside of that church that were not able to leave it because of the size and scope of the fire. The good news is everybody apparently has been accounted for, so that's made law enforcement pretty happy here that there's not going to be an even worse outcome than the one that we have. We know the age ranges of those that have been injured were starting at age 6, a child whose arm was injured in the course of this incident, all the way up to age 67. We know 2 people had multiple gunshot wounds, and they're in critical condition in the hospital, so not quite out of the woods just yet. Obviously, a very difficult thing for that community. And now the second church shooting in approximately a month's time, obviously the first one being in Minneapolis, Minnesota Catholic Church, when school kids were in their first week of school and celebrating Mass to get back into the classroom. So obviously a difficult few weeks here on a number of different fronts when it comes to these shootings, Ryan.
And are the investigators giving us any information about the suspected attacker?
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of details on this person. Thomas Jacob Sanford, he's 40 years old. You're looking at a photograph of him there. He's an Iraqi war veteran. As far as his detailed military history, that's something we're still trying to get some information on, as well as whether or not he has any sort of connection to this particular church or congregation, or why this. There is definitely some indication of planning here. So yesterday they sent the bomb squad to his house. That's because of the church scene. You're looking at his vehicle right there on our screen. They found several IEDs in the course of the church. Obviously, he drives into the church there. You see the bricks clearly on top of the vehicle. You're looking at the bomb squad video from yesterday. And so when we put it all together, this is somebody who had planned for a lot, planned to conduct a significant shooting event. Quite frankly, it's a bit of a miracle that it's only as bad as it is, given the amount of people that were in that church. Law enforcement responded and engaged and fired rounds at the suspect within 8 minutes. That's a pretty fast response time, particularly not in a major city, just given the fact that police obviously need to respond there. So that's at least what we know preliminarily about where the investigation stands.
And the FBI says that they're investigating this as what they call an act of targeted violence. Does that designation have any legal weight to it? What does it mean?
It doesn't have a ton of legal weight. You're going to hear more about this. I've used this phrase over the past several months. Basically, when we've seen instances where somebody has a specific issue with a facility, a specific issue with a group of people that are not normally kind of in a protected class. Obviously, if people are worshiping, if this person was still alive, they could look at a civil rights case potentially federally. There would be other federal charges if Sanford was still alive. You know, the thing about this is law enforcement is searching for a term to describe really something that concerns them deeply in this country, which is the frequency of these types of attacks. Somebody going and targeting a specific location, or as we've seen in the case of the United Healthcare CEO shooting a specific individual. I think of the Park Avenue shooting just a couple blocks from us here in New York City, targeting the NFL. Somebody who is looking to do something against a specific place versus somebody who just goes into a crowd and is looking to hurt people. That's why they're calling it targeted violence. Does it mean anything legally? Not at the moment. They're just looking for something to be a catch-all bin for what is becoming an increasing reality in this country, even more than it had been, which is hard to believe.
Okay, Tom Winter, thank you for that update. We appreciate it as always.
Got it.
Up next, as Washington braces for a government shutdown that could take effect in less than 36 hours, Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey is standing by with the latest on the negotiations and Democrats' plans. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the government is barreling toward its funding deadline with no agreement to avoid a shutdown. Democrats in both chambers standing firm, and together a sharp contrast from 6 months ago when the House's stopgap funding bill passed through the Senate with the help of some Democrats. Joining me now is Maryland Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey. Congressman Ivey, thanks for joining us. I want to start first with your reaction to where things stand here, less than 36 hours until the funding deadline. Are you glad to see this meeting between President Trump and congressional leaders happening after last week's cancellation? Does it give you any level of hope that perhaps a shutdown can be avoided?
Well, I mean, it's a step in the right direction, I would say. I'm not under a big illusion that President Trump's going to be a big deal maker on this front, given what he said last week when he canceled the meeting. But, we'll see. And, the only way to work something out, I thought, was to have the parties come together. And this is a big step for that.
For you personally, what would it take to get your vote to allow the spending plan to go forward that would prevent the government from being shut down? Is there a specific thing you're looking for?
Well, I think there's a lot of broad concern that came out of what they did with H.R. 1, the thing they used to call the big, beautiful bill, but don't call it that anymore for obvious reasons. But, you had this massive attack on healthcare, accessibility and affordability that took place under that bill. You got $1 trillion in cuts from Medicaid. And now we've got the refusal of the Republicans to extend the tax credits for the ACA. So people could be looking at double, triple premiums with respect to the payments that they're supposed to make for those. And that's just going to make it too, expensive for many people. So there's multiple hits just on the healthcare front that I'm concerned about. There are other issues too. I know we can't do them all here at once, but SNAP cuts was another one. I mean, they need to cancel the cuts that they've made to the extent possible and start trying to make things more affordable for the American people.
Now, the argument Republicans are making is we're just trying to extend this conversation for 7 weeks. Funding levels are going to remain basically where they were before. Why not allow for 7 additional weeks of negotiations? What's your answer to that?
Well, we'll set aside the fact that they took all of August off and then sent us home early last week when we could have been here doing the negotiations to address this instead of waiting till the 11th hour. But, these are rushing up pretty quickly on regular folks. The open season for their health care determination coming up soon.
Congressman, I don't mean to cut you off, but your leader and Chuck Schumer are about to speak. If you're able to stand by, and we'll get you to react to this after they're done talking.
Sure.
Even though we have requested repeated meetings with Leader Thune, Speaker Johnson, and the President, we have very large differences on health care and on their ability to undo whatever budget we agree to through rescissions and through impoundment, as well as pocket rescissions. And I think for the first time, the President heard our objections and heard why we needed a bipartisan bill. Their bill has not one iota of Democratic input. That is never how we've done this before. When I was leader, we negotiated 4 times with Republicans, and we never had a shutdown. And so it's up to the Republicans whether they want to shut down or not. We've made to the President some proposals. Our Republican leaders will have to talk to them about them, but ultimately he's the decision maker. And if he will accept some of the things we asked, which we think the American people are for, on health care and on rescissions, he can avoid a shutdown. But there are still large differences between us.
It was a frank and direct discussion with the President of the United States and Republican leaders, but significant and meaningful differences remain. Democrats are fighting to protect the health care of the American people, and we are not going to support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of everyday Americans. Period. Full stop. There's a Republican-caused healthcare crisis that is causing hospitals and nursing homes and community-based health clinics all across the country, in rural America, urban America, small-town America, the heartland of America, and black and brown communities throughout this country. And that crisis is happening right now. And that's why we believe there is urgency to both keeping the government open, reaching a bipartisan spending agreement that actually meets the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, their economic well-being and quality of life, while also addressing the dangerous Republican healthcare crisis.
We laid out to the President some of the consequences of what's happening in healthcare. And by his face and by the way he looked, I think he heard about them for the first time. The closing of rural hospitals, the fact that so many clinics are closing. And I don't know if he knew this before, but the fact that people will pay $4,000 more a year, $400 more a month, close to $5,000 more a year on their health care premiums if we don't do anything. And people don't know what to do. The average working family can't afford that. I told him how I met a mother who was crying to me because her daughter had cancer. And what has happened with health care, with what they have done, she's going to watch her daughter suffer and maybe die. And so he seemed to, for the first time, understand the magnitude of this crisis. And we hope he'll talk to the Republican leaders and tell them we need bipartisan input on health care, on rescissions into their bill. Their bill does not have they never talk to us. Thune didn't negotiate with me. Johnson didn't negotiate with Hakeem. And on the key issues, the Appropriations Committee, which has talked about 3 of the smaller bills, they're good bills, they said the appropriators couldn't agree and said kick it up to the 4 leaders. They still haven't talked.
And let me say, we're deadly serious about addressing the Republican-caused health care crisis because it's a deadly serious issue for the American people. Largest cut to Medicaid in American history. Hospitals, nursing homes, and community-based health clinics closing right now. The fact that more than 20 million Americans are on the brink of experiencing dramatically increased premiums, copays, and deductibles because of the Republican refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which benefit working class Americans. And we pointed that out. I pointed that out. Working class Americans, their health care, that's what we're fighting to preserve, to defend, and to strengthen.
Thank you. Question? Yeah, we're going to take questions or not? No. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, you were listening there to the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries after they emerged from a meeting with President Donald Trump, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and the House Speaker Mike Johnson. They were discussing this impasse that two sides are on as it relates to the government funding and the possibility of a shutdown happening midnight tomorrow if they don't come up with an agreement. I want to bring back in Congressman Glenn Ivey, if we still have him, to get his reaction to this in real time. Congressman, thank you for standing by and rolling with the punches and breaking news, first of all. But I want you to respond to 2 specific things here. Chuck Schumer saying that we still have very large disagreements, but that he felt that President Trump heard their objections. And then your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, saying that those significant differences remain. Does this make you feel that there's a chance that there could be some level of an agreement that can be made before the deadline, or do you think there's still a lot of work to be done?
Well, I mean, the comment that jumped out at me, I think it was from Schumer, was that judging by the president's expression, this was the first time he had heard that, you had these rural impacts where, healthcare facilities were shutting down and working class people were going to be affected at this level. I'm surprised if he hasn't heard that before because, we've been screaming that from the mountaintops for several months now, and it's only gotten worse. However, if that is the case, and maybe there's some kind of an epiphany here, and he realizes, frankly, it's in his own political interest as well as the Republicans' political interest to address this healthcare crisis now instead of waiting.
All right, now we hear the vice president is at the sticks, which is what we call the area where they respond coming out of the West Wing. Let's hear what the vice president has to say. It looks like the congressional leaders are with him as well.
We're shutting down the people's government and all the essential services that come along with it. If you look at what Chuck Schumer has said in the past consistently, it's whatever our disagreements are, let's negotiate with them. Let's talk about them. Let's figure out a bipartisan solution, but you don't shut the government down. In other words, you don't put a gun to the American people's head and say, unless you do exactly what Senate and House Democrats want you to do, we're going to shut down your government. That's exactly what they're proposing out there. Now, we have to remember, they're very frustrated. They say that they're very frustrated about the fact that this negotiation has not taken place until today. But if you look at the original thing they did with this negotiation, it was a $1.5 trillion spending package, basically saying to the American people, we want to give massive amounts of money, hundreds of billions of dollars to illegal aliens for their health care while Americans are struggling to pay their health care bills. That was their initial foray into this negotiation. We thought it was absurd. We told them it was absurd. And now they come in here saying that if you don't give us everything that we want, we're going to shut down the government. We think that's preposterous. We think it's totally unacceptable, and we think the American people are going to suffer because these guys won't do the right thing. Now, I want to make one final point here. You will hear a lot from Senate Democrats, from House Democrats about the fact that American health care policy is broken. Well, we know that American health care policy is broken. We've been trying to fix it for the 8 months that we've been in office, but every single thing that they accuse about being broken about American health care is policy the Democrats have supported for the past decade. So if they want to talk about how to fix American health care policy, let's Let's do it. The Speaker would love to do it. The Senate Majority Leader would love to do it. Let's work on it together. But let's do it in the context of an open government that's providing essential services to the American people. That's all that we're proposing to do. And the fact that they refuse to do that shows how unreasonable their position is. I think we're headed to a shutdown because the Democrats won't do the right thing. I hope they change their mind, but we're going to see. I'll let the Speaker say a few words.
Thank you, Vice President Vance. I want to thank the President as well. They showed strong leadership today. They invited the 4 leaders over here because the President is operating in good faith, and he demonstrated that very well. The problem is that Chuck Schumer and Leader Jeffries refuse to acknowledge the simple facts. Let's review what the simple facts are. As the Vice President was saying, this is the common sense thing to do. This is the right thing to do. This is the simple thing to do. By way of review, the House is getting back to the way the regular appropriations process is supposed to work. 12 separate appropriations bills passed through the House Appropriations Committee, 3 off the floor. The Senate doing their work as well. All this in bipartisan fashion, by the way. They passed 3 bills in the Senate. Those bills don't match up exactly. So for the first time in years, since 2019, you have a conference committee that is being constituted between the House and the Senate. This is the way a bill becomes a law. They work out the differences. All this is happening in bipartisan fashion. The problem is we've run out of clock. September 30th is the end of the fiscal year, so we need a little more time. So what we did in the Republican majority is the right, responsible, simple thing. A clean, continuing resolution, a short-term, nonpartisan continuing resolution. It's only 24 pages in length. Leader Thune has a copy if you want to see the exhibit. There's nothing partisan in here. No policy writers, none of our big party preferences, because we want to do the right thing by the American people and allow more time for negotiation. Now, there's a reason that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have come out here, stomped the feet, saying that they can't go along with this. They're trying to bring in extraneous issues. They issued a counterproposal. You should go take a look at what they requested. $1.5 trillion in new spending that is unrelated to the ongoing appropriations process. They wanted to, as you said, restore taxpayer-funded benefits, okay? Hard-working taxpayers in America. They want to take your funds and give that for benefits to illegal aliens. They want to restore that because we got rid of it. They want to prop up left-leaning media outlets. $500 million they threw in on top of that. $1.5 trillion on a 7-week stopgap funding measure. We're not going to do that. They know we can't do that. And we never have in the past. During the Biden administration, there were 13 threatened shutdowns. The Republicans in the minority did the right thing. We kept the government open. We're simply asking for the Democrats to do the same. Again, I want to thank President Trump for the strong, solid leadership. He listened to the arguments, and they just wouldn't acknowledge the simple facts. I want to thank Vice President here for showing his leadership as well. If the Democrats make the decision to shut the government down, the consequences are on them, and I think it's absolutely tragic. We've never said that was a good idea. We never believed it is. And I want you to remember, when we voted in the House, we passed it out of the House. The House has done its job. We did that almost 2 weeks ago. Every Democrat in the House except one voted to shut the government down. That is the record. And don't forget it. I'll ask Leader Thune to step in here.
Well, thanks, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President. This right here, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're talking about. 24 pages. It's a continuing resolution to fund the government through November the 21st. I don't know where they're saying this is some huge partisan thing. This is something we do fairly routinely. And when the Democrats had the majority on 13 different occasions, they had the majority, President Biden was in the White House, we passed continuing resolutions to fund the government. This is purely and simply hostage-taking on behalf of the Democrats. The Republicans are united. House Republicans, Senate Republicans, President Trump. The House has passed a clean funding resolution to fund the government until November the 21st. It's clean, it is bipartisan, and it is short-term. But it gives us enough time to finish the appropriations process, which is the way we should be funding the government. So Republicans in the House and the Senate, President united, they've passed the bill. This is sitting right now at the Senate desk. We could pick it up and pass it tonight. We could pick it up and pass it tomorrow before the government shuts down. And then we don't have a government shutdown. It is totally up to the Democrats, because right now they are the only thing standing between the American people and the government shutting down. We're all in favor of funding the government. And this is something that's been done routinely 13 different times by the Democrats when they had the majority. So to me, it's purely a hostage-taking exercise on the part of the Democrats. We are willing to sit down and work with them. on some of the issues they want to talk about, whether it's the extension of premium tax credits with reforms. We're happy to have that conversation. But as of right now, this is a hijacking of the American people, and it's the American people who are going to pay the price.
Russ, you want to say a few words?
Sure. We want to keep this government open. It is not good for the American people to have the government shut down for any period of time. We will manage it appropriately, but it is something that can all be avoided. It can all be avoided by accepting a reasonable position, which is what the House has passed and what sits at the Senate desk, which is to continue to fund the government with a short-term continuing resolution. It has never been a viewpoint that $1.5 trillion is a reasonable amount of spending to be included on a short-term CR. This is hostage-taking. It is not something that we are going to accept, and we hope that the Democrats come back from the brink, fund this government, and allow us to move forward. Thank you.
Great.
Mr. Vice President, so just to be clear, is there room for negotiation here with Democrats? And you mentioned you believe that we are headed toward a government shutdown. Is the federal government preparing to fire federal workers if the government does indeed shut down?
Well, first of all, we have to keep essential services functioning as well as possible if the Democrats shut down the government, and Russ has been tasked with making sure that's possible. Now, you asked about negotiations. One of the things I admired about the president, but frankly the entire team's approach during the conversation we just had with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries was, they have some crazy ideas. Giving taxpayer money to illegal aliens for health care, that's a crazy idea. Funding transgender surgeries in Peru, that's a crazy idea. But they had some ideas that I actually thought were reasonable, and they had some ideas that the president thought was reasonable. What's not reasonable is to hold those ideas as leverage and to shut down the government unless we give you everything that you want. There were multiple times where Leader Jeffries or Leader Schumer would say, you know what, we should be doing this, and the President of the United States would say, yeah, absolutely, let's have that conversation, but we're going to do it in the context of the people's government being open. We're not going to let you take the people's government hostage and then give you everything that you want. And that's really the state of the negotiation. Yeah, let's have a conversation. Let's have a negotiation, but we're not going to shut down the government because we won't give the Democrats everything that they want. Caitlin.
Can you respond to what Senator Schumer said, that there were aspects about health care ending for certain people that the president was learning about for the first time in that meeting? And was the president open to a deal on the ACA subsidies?
Well, I'm highly skeptical that the president was learning about it for the first time, thanks to Chuck Schumer. But what I will say is, look, we have put a $50 billion rural hospital fund into the big, beautiful bill that we passed a few months ago, because we know that under Biden administration's policies, there are a lot of small town hospitals, a lot of rural health care that was getting shut down and that was struggling. We're trying to fix that problem. In fact, we're happy to work with Democrats to fix that problem. We want to work across the aisle to make sure that people have access to good health care. We are not going to let Democrats shut down the government, take a hostage unless we give them everything that they want. That's not how the people's government has ever worked. That's certainly not how it's going to work under the Trump administration.
Go ahead, please. This is very important on health care. Their counterproposal, what Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are demanding, is that they claw back the $50 billion that we put into the rural hospital support structure. They want to take that back. We're not going to do that. We passed that because we have to allow for that. Also, if they shut the government down, not only are troops unpaid, federal workers, and all the services that everybody relies upon, but the WIC program, the nutrition program, women, infant, and children, they will not get that program, will not be funded. FEMA won't be funded. We have hurricanes off the coast of the United States right now. This is serious business. You have telehealth, you have mental health services, all that's funded by the government would stop if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats have their way. The Democrat shutdown would be damaging for the country. We can't allow for it.
Yeah. Thank you all.
That was a pretty remarkable difference from what we heard from Democrats just a few minutes ago. And I think the shutdown meter is officially spiking off the charts. If we were at 75% before this meeting, we're pretty close to 90 or 95% after what we heard there. The vice president saying, and I quote, "I think we are headed to a shutdown." The Senate Majority Leader John Thune saying purely and simply this is hostage taking by Democrats. Congressman Glenn Ivey has been listening in on all of this with us. Quickly, Congressman, I want to give you a chance to respond to this. It doesn't appear like your Republican colleagues are in the mood to make a deal.
It's hard to know with those guys, but there's a couple of things we should just correct up front. I mean, illegal immigrants, quote unquote, are not eligible for these kinds of federal health care benefits. So I'm not sure where that's coming from, but that's a line that they've stuck with over and over again. And, the transgender is another one. But, the bottom line is, I guess to the extent there's a hostage, it's the health care for the American people. I know Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Schumer are pushing to make sure there's restoration of that, taking the $50 billion slush fund off the table. But that would be exchanged for putting $137 billion back in. So it's not like the people would get $50 billion less. They'd get more than what the Republicans have given them in the current legislation. So the Republicans have dug a very deep hole on health care coverage, especially for regular Americans. We want to try and fix that, and we know that this may be our last chance to do it for some time to come.
And before I let you go, I know I've taken a lot of your time. You have so many federal workers in your district, sir. How nervous are you that their jobs could be at risk if this shutdown goes into effect tomorrow night?
I've had a chance to talk a lot to my constituents over the last week, and especially over the weekend. And I think their view, and I share this, is that the Trump administration is trying to cut their jobs as fast as possible anyway. The only way we can address that and have them at least move forward in a fair way that respects basic rights for government employees is to try and fight back now. So, and by the way, they're worried about losing their health care coverage too. So, I get the point, that the threat that they've made, and talk about holding hostages, that's an ultimate one there. But, at the end of the day, I think people recognize that this administration has been essentially a bulldozer when it comes to federal government employees, and count on them to restrain themselves in any way.
Okay, Congressman, thank you for sticking with us. I appreciate it. Let's bring our panel in now for a 4-minute discussion, guys. We got to stick within these 4 minutes. Reese Gorman, politics reporter at Notice. Archie Siddiqui is a former aide to Speaker Pelosi and the founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. And T.W. Arihi, the Republican strategist and vice president of the Push Digital Group. So, Reese, I want to start with you. Does it feel here like Democrats are taking a big risk? You hear what the congressman says, that these federal workers already feel that their jobs are at risk. The shutdown doesn't make it any different. But Chuck Schumer, back in the spring, was worried about giving Russ Vought, who we saw at the sticks there, the keys to a government shutdown and what he could possibly do. What could happen here?
I mean, nobody ever wins in a shutdown. I mean, we look at, no one really ever gets what they want if they're trying to hold something hostage. Look at 2013, whether it be Ted Cruz and Obamacare. If you look at 18 with DACA, if you look at 18 with the Trump and the border wall funding, they shut it down to get something, and they never got what they wanted. And so that seems to be the risk that Schumer and Democrats are taking right now is, if you shut down the government to get something, you very well might just end up voting for this same bill to get out of a shutdown.
Yeah. So, Archie, who is Chuck Schumer messaging for here? Is it the average everyday American, or is it the base of the Democratic Party that was angry that he caved back in the spring?
I think he's messaging for every American family that is really struggling under high costs and affordability. I mean, period. Because this deadline is real and urgent on the Affordable Care Act. And so when you look at this, these premiums are being negotiated now. Letters are going to go out next month. And if there isn't a course correction, then there's going to be a real health care crisis. This is in addition to the Republican reconciliation bill of $1 billion of cuts. And this isn't just there are a lot of ripple effects to these decisions. It's not just folks who are accessing these credits. It's across the whole healthcare system, because if you take that much money out of the system, there are going to be repercussions.
So, TW, it did feel like there were two different feelings about the way that this meeting was. When the Democrats walked out, I thought, wow, maybe there's a breakthrough here. A completely different perspective from the Republicans. I mean, is it your sense that a shutdown's inevitable at this point?
Well, it definitely feels more like it. My question is, I still don't really know what the off-ramp is for the Democrats. Look, their base does want to fight, and they have chosen health care as the marking point. But what I found fascinating, hearing Speaker Johnson talk there, he was more than willing to talk about health care, talk about the subsidies moving forward. But let's not forget, we got a bit of good news the other day with the hurricane deviating away from South Carolina. What if that wasn't the case? The Democrats were willing to shut FEMA down to have this discussion. Now, those are ripple effects that could lead to loss of life this week. So we need to be very, very careful, especially now that we're going more to regular order and Speaker Johnson is moving these bills through Congress. That's the way we should be taking care of this.
But the president has said he wants to get rid of FEMA, too, so there's that part of it.
Perhaps.
But Archie, you know, to TW's point, though, what the Republicans are asking for is just another 7 weeks to hash out some of these exact things that you're talking about. Why wouldn't Democrats just take that offer and just take another 7 weeks to hash some of these details out and fight a bigger fight over a longer-term spending plan?
I mean, what I thought was fascinating, there was a lot of references in this press conference about what's happened in the past. And what usually happens in these types of negotiations is it's a four-corner deal with the White House being involved. This is the first time anybody has talked. This press conference was all about the blame game, and we've already seen a rescissions package in July. We've seen another move by OMB in September. So I think Democrats actually, you know, Republicans do not have a filibuster-proof majority. So the fact this take it or leave it, no negotiation, we're not going to talk to you, I think that's the challenge. I mean, Democrats have no choice.
15 seconds, Reese. Is there going to be a shutdown?
I think that's definitely looking more likely for sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely I mean, the vice president said himself.
You can't just say yes or no. I gave you a yes or no question. Is it going to shut down?
I don't want to be wrong. It's 50-50.
Yeah, if you don't want to give that's the point. That's a yes or no question. Reese, Archie, TW, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but there's more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.